Persona is a franchise that I don't think you need me to tell you about, especially if you've purposefully clicked this video. But the basic vibe, if you don't know, is that it takes the exploration of the human psyche and the definition of self and then crams it all in a very stylized, extremely cool package of teens dealing with the day-to-day struggle of high school and whatever the hell this is. The games tackle subjects like depression, how the media influences us, the basic idea that emotions and bonds of friendship are what bring people together in a world that becomes increasingly isolating. They're beautiful, they're wild, they're cool as hell. I love them. But sometimes you don't want to play as a high schooler. Sometimes you want a giant sword, you want a fantasy world, you want a protagonist that talks. And that is why we now have ReFantazio. It's still got all the awesome anime cutscenes, stylized UI, friendship mechanics, and turn-based battles. You know, the Persona vibe. Except Fantasio. But here's the thing. I don't know if it's because I'm getting over a cold and maybe that cough medicine has got me all over the place, but I'm not really sure how to talk about this game. Like, when I say this is a Jesse game, I mean it. I only got to play 3 or so hours, but from moment one, I knew this was going to be a wild ride. There is so much going on here. In its least spoilery form, you play as the protagonist, a young man who, along with his fairy Gallica, journey to lift a curse placed upon your friend, the prince. Except in a high fantasy world where goat-horned people and elves and more reside, and it appears your tribe, the Elda, are looked down upon as tainted. And I, of course, assumed it was because you look human, and I was like, oh, that's fun, that's an interesting take on fantasy, but we'll get to that later. In what I got to play, I was joined by Stroll, a noble of the Clemar tribe, who are the previously mentioned horned people. He's smart, he's capable, he's sassy as all hell, clearly has one of those backstories we'll reveal over time kind of situations. And while what I played definitely had hints of other characters to come, the protagonist, Gallica, and Stroll were the ones I got to mess with. Now, much like any good RPG, our heroes have weapon attacks, magic attacks, defensive stances, and their archetype powers. These are unlocked powers within your character that will serve as a class system. Things like a Seeker, which is a well-rounded job that I played with and has sort of a wind-based magic system. There's a Mage, Thief, Knight, Gunner, and more, and you can unlock additional ones that are much stronger by improving your bonds or friendship with characters in the game. These bonds are very important because the main thrust of the non-spoilery bit here is that the king has died, and now the powers that be vie for the throne. And you get caught up in all of that, so it becomes a race to gain as much support from the tribes of the land by increasing these bonds to claim the throne. Now, this is where I'll say I'm going to talk about the game in a little more detail, and for those of you who don't want to know anything else, stop here. If you have no questions as to why this is a Jesse game, feel free to walk away. But if you're curious, it's time to get real weird with it. So the moment you sit down to play the game, you're gonna sense something is off. And that's fitting, because the devs have explained that the game is about fighting anxiety. It's a big theme, it's something they've been promoting and talking about for a while. I don't really fully know what that all means by the end of the game, but when you begin, it hits you with some regicide. The king is murdered by a beautiful anime man with bad intentions, and then suddenly we get a crazy good song with images that definitely do not look like a fantasy world. And then all of that folds up into a book. And that book, within its pages, we see depictions of what I assume is the modern world that we know. And then the voice of a scheming man breaks the fourth wall like, I know you're there. He then asks you for your name, and not your character name. He wants to know who you really are. I, of course, was sitting there with the devs around like, oh, we're doing this, are we? I am a total sucker for this in games. The put your name in the game in the first few minutes and then forget about it till 80 hours later when someone turns to the camera like, isn't that right, Jesse Cox? Like, I haven't even played anything yet, and I'm already like, this is a Jesse game. This is full Jesse game territory. And it just so happens that the book we've seen hints of in the opening is held onto by the protagonist at the start. It's the same book that the baddies here try to take from you, and it's the one that gets your butt knocked over the cliff into the valley below to start you on your adventure. After making your way out of the valley with only Gallica and the howling winds to accompany you, you realize you've got a ways to go. So, in order to pass the time easier, Gallica does another thing that I absolutely love. She casts a spell on you that plays traveling music directly into your mind to keep you not thinking about how far you have to go.
Music was the first magic this world ever knew, after all. Makes the road a little easier.
In this game, the music you hear is literally Gallica pumping appropriate tunes into your head. That's awesome. I love that. Upon reaching town, you get a little bit more backstory about what you're doing there. Like I mentioned before, you're on a secret mission to infiltrate the guard and meet with a contact on behalf of the prince. But more importantly, now you can go around and chat it up with the townsfolk, get some of that lore about what's going on, meet characters who definitely feel like they'll be important later, and then report to the recruitment center. This is where we meet the person who will become our first party member, Stroll, who seems like a good egg, and I'm sure we can expect lots of horny fan art for, you know, because he has horns. The next little bit of, oh, this is interesting, comes almost immediately. You present yourself before the haughty captain, ready to enlist. And the thing here that got me was that the camera moves from this third-person perspective to a first-person one when the captain asks, so what brings you here to enlist? Now, I don't know if this is some sort of camera trick to make it more engaging, or if it's continuing to break the fourth wall. I'll be honest, I don't know, but I did find it a very clever choice. Anyway, you join up, and the night before you go off in your newly formed company to hopefully find your contact, we get to delve into the book. So I'm thinking either this is the past, or maybe the fantasy world is our world for some reason, and that's why the fourth wall breaks? Look, I don't know. I have no answers for you, but already pretty mysterious. I'm kind of loving it. The next morning, we set off in the caravan to the northern border fort, and hopefully our contact, giving us a very cool overworld map and a day cycle for traveling, which I didn't really get to delve into, but I'm curious how that works later. The figure here you see on the screen as it shifts the days, that's the prince you're trying to help, if you were curious. Now, why the need for border forts and such? Well, monsters. These invading monsters, there are so many monsters, and they appear to be coming from outside the kingdom, attempting to breach its defenses. But again, a weird mystery here. Everyone keeps talking about this outside force, this invasion, these monsters, an unstoppable enemy that at one point they're about to name, but then, ding dong, there it is. My next, this is gonna be a wild game moment. The monsters are humans. That's why your character, the Elda, looks human but isn't called a human. Because humans in this world, they're the baddies. But if the Elda look like us, then what do the humans look like in this world? Oh, gang, get ready. As you arrive at the fort, you discover it's been attacked by humans, and here is where we get our reveal. Yes, the monsters are humans. Yes, the humans look insane, and I'm sure all of it means something, but again, we'll come back to that in a sec. As you make your way to the top of the fort, you fight enemies, you find loot, standard RPG procedure. The best part here for me is that you can attack enemies before combat begins and get a bonus attack with a stun before the fight actually starts proper. You can also totally screw up and they can get the drop on you. And then I discovered another thing that I love, that as you level up, you can just flat out be more powerful than enemies and kill them without even having to actually engage them in combat, which was a pretty cool way to keep the flow moving. The combat menu here, I'll try to break it down for you. Up above, you have glowy crystals. Those are your turn icons. The more of those you have, the more you can do. Right now, I have 2 for my 2 fighting characters. The enemy has 1 because, you know, it's just one egg man. You have your standard skill powers, which could be magical or physical or whatever. You have a melee attack, a guard, and a turn pass, as well as the ability to turn back time to retry stuff. I'm pretty sure, at least I'll assume, that that's removed from harder modes. Another thing about the combat, and I'm pretty sure this is the most enjoyable part for me, if you manage to get through the battle without taking any damage, you get bonuses. And that made my desire to make it through as many battles as possible without taking any damage very important to me. As a guy who's always trying to play an RPG just a little over-leveled, this is the gateway to that for me, for sure. Anyway, you continue your ascent to the top of the fort to do battle with the giant human that appears to be some sort of metaphor, maybe, or something. It's a three-legged, four-armed, what appears to be a pomegranate with branches that contain apples and then an owl head. Look, it definitely means something. Potentially some sort of Adam and Evie thing going on there. I know there are references here, but I'll let you in the comments try to fit them all together. But it feels like if you were gonna meet a monster human for the first time, it would definitely be this Adam and Eve vibe, but with also the pomegranate for maybe fertility and the owl head for potentially wisdom. I don't know. Like I said, in the comments, I'd love to hear what you think. Engaging this human appears to be folly, and as you waver in the face of its overwhelming power, a mysterious voice contacts you, offering you enough power to defeat it and the power to save your friends and awaken the hero within. To do so, in Persona fashion, you rip your heart out, which is now or maybe was always metal, and awakens your archetype. After stomping the human, you meet your contact, an old badass because of course it's an old badass, and your group makes camp for the night. Strange things are afoot. It almost seems like it was a setup, and you want to report back to the capital to report your findings, but of course, the game has other plans. I'm not going to spoil anything else that happens after that. I feel like I've already said way too much, but I will simply say, this is only the first hour and a half. There is a lot more wild stuff to talk about, but I'm going to let you discover that on your own. I am so curious how this game plays out. It's got its claws in me, that's for sure. I honestly just need answers, which, as I said before, is exactly the kind of game that I love. Sadly for me, I won't get those answers right away. And like you, I will have to wait for Metaphor ReFantazio to come out on October 11th. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, please give the video a like. Let Atlus know that this video got you intrigued or hyped or just as curious as me. And I'll see you in October.